Indie Author Lab from the Alliance of Independent Authors is a brand new in-person event for indie authors during London Book Fair Week. Taking place in London on March 11, 2026, it's a full day of mentoring, workshops, and community connection. Created for indie authors by indie authors. Learn more and secure your tickets at selfpublishingadvice.org/indieauthorlab. I'm Howard Lovey of the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com, and you're listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. Every episode, I interview an ally member to find out what inspires them and how they are an inspiration to other authors. My guest this episode is Jerri Williams, a retired FBI agent who spent 26 years investigating major financial crimes before building a second career as an author and podcaster. Since 2016, she has written widely about FBI myths and misconceptions and built a strong independent publishing platform. I'll let Jerri Williams tell her story.
Hi, Howard. It's great to be here. This is Jerri Williams, retired FBI agent, author, and podcaster. I've been writing books now since 2016. My first book was published, and I would call myself an accidental indie author.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll go into that. And a good thing you're retired, so I don't have the right to remain silent, right? And anything I say will not be used against me, or?
Well, I should be asking you because you're the one recording this. So
right.
I'll try to make sure that I only say things that I want everyone to hear.
Yeah. Well, you've said you've always been a storyteller. So first, tell me, where did you grow up, and was reading and writing always a part of your early life?
Absolutely. I am an Air Force brat. So my father was in the Air Force the entire time I was growing up. We never lived anywhere for more than 3 years. So we were always moving. And even during those 3 years that we might have been in England or Germany, we probably moved during that time period too. So I was always having to make new friends. I had 2 sisters, but I was always coming into a new environment. And sometimes when it took a while to, get settled in, books were my friends. Mm-hmm. My whole family read books. And, we were the type of people who would go visit someone and then look around to see if they had a magazine or a newspaper or a paperback nearby. So we were very used to picking up a book and reading it whenever we had any leisure time.
Mm-hmm. So what eventually led you to law enforcement? What did you study in college?
I studied psychology. And after I graduated from college, the first full-time job, permanent job I had was what we called an aftercare counselor. But it's really like a juvenile probation officer. But I got the kids that went away to the reform schools and placement centers and group homes, the kids that had gotten into trouble and were adjudicated and sent away for a while. And so it was called an aftercare counselor, where I really got to use my psychology degree in the different treatments that we did with the kids and their parents as they were returning back to the community.
Mm-hmm. So it was psychology that first was your first connection with law enforcement.
Yeah, I was always fascinated about, what made people tick. So definitely, I never looked directly at a law enforcement position. Again, I was thinking psychologist, psychiatrist, something like that. Matter of fact, in college, I took all of the prerequisite courses like organic chemistry and physics and things like that to go to medical school, but never got that far. Mm-hmm. But my roommate in college was a police officer. When she graduated, she became a Baltimore City police officer. So when the FBI was looking to recruit more women and minorities, it wasn't something that I rejected. I looked at it and I thought, well, let me see what this is about.
And I'll bet the psychology degree didn't hurt either. Human motivations are very much a part of law enforcement and also later for your writing career too.
Absolutely. Both of those have been a great resource for me as I began my writing career. So I've written 4 books. I've written 2 crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers. I've also put together with my son, a puzzle book, an FBI puzzle book. But my bestseller, and what people know me most about as an author, is my book called FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, where I help people understand the cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. So I speak to a lot of writers groups. I was just speaking to the Mystery Writers of America's New York chapter last week about, how to write authentic FBI characters.
Hmm. So you're rushing on ahead. We're still in your backstory right now. So
Oh, okay.
we'll get to your books a little later. But that's fine. Tell me how you spent most of your career in the FBI.
I worked economic crime, financial crimes like Ponzi schemes and advanced fee schemes, telemarketing frauds and embezzlements, things like that. I always found it fascinating what people had to say to themselves to make it okay to steal somebody else's money.
Was there a particular case or a moment in your FBI career that made you realize I need to someday tell these stories?
Well, I think I always knew that I wanted to write a book. I knew that before I even joined the FBI because, again, I'm a reader. And, you know, when you really love books, there's always in the back of your mind the thought, I could do this too. And so I
Mhm.
knew I always wanted to write a book. And so definitely looking around and hearing the stories, the true stories of the FBI, I knew that I had a huge resource for potential plots and characters.
Yeah, yeah. Now, toward the end of your career, you became a spokesperson for the Philadelphia division. How did working with the media change the way you thought about public storytelling?
Well, that was a strategic move on my part
Mhm.
because I was at the end of my career. I had been starting to write a book. My first book took me 8 years to write before it was published. I'm sure you've heard that story before.
Oh,
And so
sure.
I was, yeah,
Only
so
eight
I
years?
only 8 years.
Yeah.
And so I knew that that position, I was doing it part time anyway, as a collateral duty, backing up the person that was the main spokesperson. So when she retired and I was offered the full-time position, no longer doing investigations, just helping shape the perception of the FBI and the Philadelphia division, I said yes, because I knew that would put me in in position with other people, writers, reporters, producers that were, interested in FBI stories. And so I worked that job for my last 4.5 to 5 years of my career. So that's what I did just as I retired from the FBI. And it definitely was helpful because my very first editor was a managing editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. She was the one who taught me how to write.
Hmm. So you knew that you weren't going to ease into a quiet life after retirement. You had planned your writing life way in advance.
Yeah, it was definitely something that I started before I retired and a goal that I've had, all of my career.
Now, what came first? Did you start writing or did you start the podcast or both at the same time?
Finished the book and I, at the time, was pursuing traditional publishing. So I had a literary agent who told me, it was with Curtis Brown, who told me that I needed to start working on a platform. As we were submitting the book to different publishers, that I should start building my platform. And at the time this was around 2014 and 2015, a lot of people were blogging, but I decided I was going to do a podcast. I was listening to podcasts, most of them concerning writing and the writing craft and books. And so I thought I would do a podcast, but it made more sense for me to do a podcast about the FBI.
Yeah. Well, that was mighty prescient of you. You kind of predicted the true crime podcast.
Yeah, there were some. I think maybe Serial started in 2014.
Oh.
So I started my podcast in January of 2016, but I really didn't know much about the true crime industry. I actually put my podcast in the category of literary arts because I thought of my podcast again as a way of helping other writers, other authors learn how to write authentic FBI plots and characters because I had read a lot of books that
Mhm.
featured the FBI and there were a lot of things that, you know,
Yeah.
that were wrong, that
Well, I'm old enough to remember the old FBI show from the from the early '70s and the late '60s, and then of course, there's the X-Files. So that's as far as I go in terms of knowing about the FBI. But so, what frustrates you the most about how the FBI is portrayed in popular culture?
well, many of the books about the FBI that feature an FBI character are serial crime books,
Mhm.
books about FBI profilers. And they have the FBI profiler, going down a dark alley or into a damp basement, actually actively searching for the serial killer. And we all know that FBI profilers are like consultants. They're not the investigator. They work with local law enforcement and state investigators and FBI agents out in the field to help them find ways to solve their what appears to be unsolvable case.
Mm.
And so they're really not out there doing the things that most books and TV shows and movies, show an FBI profiler doing. So, that can be a little frustrating, but I understand now as an author that you can't have an FBI profiler sitting in an office, flipping through a file.
Yeah, yeah.
That just is not a story. And so I definitely understand. And, I'm not mad at people now, if they want to write a book and show their FBI profiler, out in the street, with guns ablazing and car chases and all of that. I understand that as an author, the most important thing is your story.
Yeah.
So if you have to make a creative compromise to get that story right, to create your tension, your drama, your complexes and, all the things that you need to make a good story, I understand. But I do warn people that if you go too far or if you have it totally wrong, that's going to take your reader out of the story.
Mhm.
And that's one thing you definitely don't want to do.
Yeah, yeah. So you're okay with creative license instead of having a profiler sit behind a desk advising they're out in the field, which doesn't necessarily happen, but it makes for better drama.
Yeah, I understand it now. A serial killer books are they're a genre on their own. And so it was created probably by, Silence of the Lambs and
Yeah.
other great books like that. And now it's what people expect. And I don't think you can really do a good crime novel with the old way. I think they did an excellent job in the TV show Mindhunter, where they
Mm.
had them more at an academic level, but still were able to find ways to create that drama and that tension, but showing them in their real position what they really did. So my second one, and I struggle between is this the first or the second one, but it would be that the FBI doesn't play well with others.
Mm.
I mean, you've seen that
Mhm.
cliche where the FBI comes in and just takes over. We're in charge,
Mhm.
and just tramples on everyone. And that just doesn't happen that way. A matter of fact, and there are many books that talk about, the FBI coming in and taking over a local murder investigation And that will really just throw me out of the story, make me want to pick up the book and throw it across the room. Because in most situations, the FBI does not have have jurisdiction in a local murder. Now, you may see the FBI working with a local police department, but that's when they're invited in. And I know everybody knows about the Nancy Guthrie case that's going on. The FBI was invited into that. It was not necessarily it, something that would come under the FBI's jurisdiction
Hmm.
normally, but they were invited to assist. And so just
For those who
having
aren't
that.
familiar, that's a famous news anchor's mother who went missing, Nancy Guthrie.
Yes, yes. I know that Ally is a very international organization. So thank you for letting people know I made that assumption. But there are certain jurisdictions that the FBI is allowed to investigate, and then some that just are not under what we do. And so
That
those are the
creates a
things
lot
that.
of drama, I guess, in, from what I've seen on TV and in books, the rivalry between the FBI and the local police. But you're saying that just doesn't happen that way.
It does not happen that way. Not at all. But again, I understand why people do it, because you want to create that tension and drama. But there may be other ways that you can do it. Maybe show this particular agent or this particular detective that are working together. They just don't like each other. But, to set it up where, the FBI is coming in and trampling, over the local police department is not accurate and somewhat harmful to law enforcement, because let's just say you are in a small police department and you've never had any interaction with the FBI. So, when the FBI shows up offering help, they're suspicious and they're
Hmm.
rejecting it because they've read too many books and watched too many TV shows and movies
Oh, yeah.
where the FBI wants to take over. And so, it's not like it's harmless
Yeah.
when misconceptions and cliches are written over and over again. So I like to say to people, when you do your research, don't necessarily rely on another TV show or movie that you've been watching to get your information about the FBI or law enforcement in general. Reach
Interesting.
out. Yeah, reach out and see if you can actually speak to somebody, in the law enforcement industry to answer your questions, or, read some of the great books that are out there, not just mine, but others that help answer your questions about what an agent or a police officer or a detective or a state trooper or whoever would do in that situation.
You've been a strong advocate for indie publishing, but you also, well, first of all, you're kind of the poster person for indie publishing, because you have your own platform. You're on print, ebook, audio, podcast. You have your own platform, like you were advised earlier in your career. Are you still open to traditional publishing, or are you indie all the way?
I am still open. I actually have an agent now that I met. I was not actively looking to write any more books and go traditional, but I met an agent who really liked my platform, enjoyed my indie published books, and offered me representation. And so I'm pursuing that right now, but I am definitely an advocate for indie publishing. I had mentioned that I was an accidental indie, and that was because, I did have an agent and was pursuing traditional publishing back in 2014, 15. By 2016, my agent had not been able to sell the book. And I did not want to put that book that I had been working on for 8 years and then continued to work on with the agent. I had a very hands-on literary agent. I wasn't going to put that in the drawer. They offered, Curtis Brown at the time was doing this white glove Amazon thing where they offered to, quote unquote, publish the book for me. And so my book was published with the Curtis Brown logo on the spine. And after that was done, that's when I learned about indie publishing, and that I could have just done that myself and not had to pay the
Yeah.
15%
Yeah.
agent fee. And I actually had already started writing the second book. It was a duology. I was going to be a trilogy, but I made it into a duology. And had started writing the second book, and I realized, well, no traditional publisher is going to want the second book and a book that had already been published, independently. And
Hmm.
so I got that book back from Curtis Brown. It wasn't like I had sold them my rights or anything. They had put it up for me. So I got it back and did it myself and published the second book. And I enjoyed that so much that when I decided to write the nonfiction book, I did that myself, and that's done really well. So yeah, I'm definitely an advocate for indie publishing. And I think that what I would suggest to people is to look at all the pathways and figure out which one works best for you. If you have a platform, such as I've been doing the podcast for 10 years now, I have I have thousands of listeners. My website's pretty robust. I also do a blog about the FBI and books, TV, and movies. And so I'm in a position that to do marketing, my everything that I do is content marketing that leads back to my books. And so they still sell today.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. As you know, traditional publishers don't ask what they can do for you, but what you can do for them. What is your existing platform? Do you need to, I mean, does the marketing kind of handle itself because you have such a long established platform?
Absolutely. I have never, and I'm not against paid marketing, but I have never done any ads or promotions for my books because the content marketing, the blog post and the podcast episodes I do, I always put a little, plug in for, the work that I've done. And so that works for me.
What kind of audience do you attract? Do you have, former law enforcement people reading your stuff, true crime fanatics?
I actually have three types of audience. I have the traditional true crime people that just want to hear about, true crime cases. I have my second largest group, I believe, are law enforcement people, who retired agents and police officers. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you were going to mention this, but, I'll toot my own horn. I was given a G-Man Honors Award by the current FBI Agent Association for telling FBI stories. And so I have a lot of people who are interested in joining the FBI that also listen. But the third group are authors and producers and script writers and, people that are writing stories about the FBI. And, that's the third group of listeners that
Hmm.
listen to the podcast. And all those people, at some point or another, whether it's just out of loyalty and support, who will go out and pick up my book. So it's a great relationship
Yeah,
between myself and my listeners and my readers.
that's wonderful. It sounds like a great combination. Well, looking back on 10 years as an author and podcaster, what have you learned about sustaining a creative career after retirement from your first profession?
You have to put yourself out there. I think there are some wonderful, wonderful books that people are not going to have an opportunity to read because they don't know that those books are there. And I think that that is one of the things that whenever I'm talking to somebody about indie publishing, the first thing is great. I'm so glad that you have this book that you want to publish. And the second question is, how are you going to find readers? What are you going to do to make sure your book gets out there and gets to the hands of people who would love exactly what you read? And I think that sometimes as authors and writers, especially who want to go indie, they forget about that second part. That
Mm.
second part is as important as the first part if you want to be successful and have people who know who you are and who want to pick up every copy of a book that you publish.
Well, sounds like you found that perfect formula and you found success. Well, Jerri, thank you so much for appearing on the show. I appreciate you setting the record straight on what the FBI does and does not do.
And thank you for having me. I've been a member of Ally for many, many years now, and it is wonderful to be able to be on your show that I've listened to so many times before.
Great. Thank you, Jerri. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. I'm Howard Lovey, Content and Communications Manager at the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. If you are a member of Ally and would like to be considered for the show, please write to me at howard@allianceindependentauthors.org and tell me what inspires you and how you could inspire other authors. As always, find more author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.